Greetings, comrades! We return to our beloved icebergs. This is essentially the final third, where there will be hardly any well-known topics. Moreover, some of the stories will seem completely illogical and could be dismissed as the product of someone's twisted imagination. But is it really that simple? Welcome to Level 6. Sweden spoke Russian. We've all heard that 200 years ago the Russian nobility spoke French better than Russian. But what about an even crazier theory? What if I told you that 300 years ago Russian was widely spoken in Sweden? It all started with this document, which at first glance looks like a mixture of Polish and Russian. It is a solemn speech on the occasion of the death of Swedish King Karl XI in 1697. The document, by the way, is authentic, not a forgery. This is where alternative history enthusiasts come into play. To them, the existence of such a text is proof that official history is lying to us. Their theories range from one extreme to another. What does this mean? Does it mean that Russia secretly ruled half of Europe and imposed its language? Or that there were so many Russians in Sweden that the king had to give a speech in their language? Or does it go even deeper, suggesting that Russians and Swedes were once one people? But let's be logical. If Swedes really spoke Russian back then, there would be tons of documents like this, not just one. The official author of the speech was Johann Gabriel Sparvenfeld, a Swedish master of ceremonies. He spoke 14 languages and served as a diplomat in Moscow. But let's address the main point. Of all the languages he spoke, why did Sparvenfeld choose Russian for his official speech rather than Swedish, the official language? Modern science still has no clear answer to this question. Do you know which version, absurd as it may seem, is considered the most likely? He did it just because. Simply because he could. Slavo-Chinese War. When talking about the Slavo-Chinese War, you probably imagine skirmishes on the Amur River in the 17th century. Forget about that. Those are child's play. I'm talking about a war that has been erased from the pages of textbooks. About a battle of titans that took place 7,534 years ago. Back then, Great Rassenia won over ancient China, Armenia. The victory was so important and difficult that our ancestors chose the day of the creation of the world, the conclusion of a peace treaty, as the new turning point in their history. Therefore, according to the Slavic calendar, it is now summer, the year 7,534 since the creation of the world. Need more proofs? Why do you think Ivan Tsarevich defeats the 3, 6 and 9-headed serpent dragon Gorinich one by one to rescue Vasilisa the Beautiful in Russian folktales? It was not just a conflict between two empires, but between two superpowers. China was a technological power that knew how to clone hundreds of thousands of warriors, like the famous Terracotta Army. Russia, on the other hand, developed along a spiritual path. Our ancestors lived in harmony with nature and had the ability to create alternative worlds in the Star Temple. They could also change the planet's biorhythms, causing cataclysms, floods, thunderstorms and poisoned rains. As a result, Russia won and China agreed to build the Great Wall of China to isolate itself from the rest of the world and protect everyone else from itself. White Brotherhood. In fact, there are two White Brotherhoods. First, it was the name given to the teachers of humanity in Helena Blavatsky's Theosophy, which I discussed in the previous section. However, we are interested in the very real organization created in 1991 in Kiev by former scientists Yuri Krivanogov and Maria Tsvigun, not a mythical one. Krivanogov became John the Baptist and Tsvigun became Mary Devi Christ, declaring herself to be the living incarnation of Christ, his mother the Virgin Mary, and his bride, 3 in 1, so to speak. The essence of the doctrine was simple. God is mother, and this mother is Marina. Like any self-respecting cult, they had a date set for the end of the world, November 24th, 1993. Thousands believed Marina, gave away their possessions, abandoned their families and were ready to die for the promised paradise. On November 10th, 1993, the last day of the announced 10 days of repentance, Tsvigun and several dozen White Brotherhood members attempted to seize St. Sophia Cathedral in Kiev. They planned to hold a 2-week prayer service there and then commit mass self-immolation. The police stormed the cathedral and prevented the tragedy. According to some sources, 666 people were detained. Zvigun reportedly wanted this number to destroy the devil. It would seem that the story is over. Maria Devi was sentenced to 4 years in prison and immediately declared Krivonogov a traitor and divorced him. The most surprising thing, however, is that she was released after serving only 1 year, and then she disappeared, only to reappear in Moscow in the mid-2000s under a new name, Victoria Preobrazhenskaya. She is no longer a messiah, but an artist, thinker, and founder of cosmic poly art. She paints abstract pictures, wears bright clothes, and apparently still considers herself a goddess, an Egyptian one this time. You can visit her website and be enlightened, but be careful. Phantom Girl from Krasnoyarsk. Imagine you work in a city archive sorting through old photographs from the early 20th century. You come across a picture of a street, a gymnasium, and a bridge across the Yenisei River. Suddenly, you notice something strange. The same little girl appears in dozens of photographs taken at different times and in different places. But she's not even in the center of the frame most of the time. She's just there. Thus, one of the most chilling urban legends of Krasnoyarsk was born in 2015. The local history museum even posted a message on its website asking anyone with any info about this girl or the photographer to reach out. They only had the initials FEA to go on. While they were trying to figure it out, people came up with their own, way more interesting explanation. This girl is a ghost. And there was plenty of evidence to prove it. First, her frightening appearance. A heavy, angry gaze from under her eyebrows. Second, it's as if no one can see her. The other people in the frame simply walk past her, paying no attention. And third, the most terrifying thing. The photos are dated 1906, 1907 and 1908. In 3 years, any child aged 7 to 10 would change noticeably, but not her. She doesn't grow. She always wears the same clothes and has the same face. A ghost forever frozen in time. However, a new discovery was made in 2022 that unfortunately put an end to the story. Another artifact was found in the museum archives. A large photo album containing pictures of Krasnoyarsk, and the girl was there again. This time though, the photographer's signature was on the cover. Photographer Yevgeny Arkhipov, FEA. And the ghost girl, she was his daughter, Galia. He simply took her with him to photo shoots and included her in the frame as his personal Easter egg or living signature. I mean, I like the ghost version more than some touching story about a father and daughter. Fillipov's race. June 25, 1903. Renowned scientist Mikhail Fillipov is found dead in his St. Petersburg laboratory. The official verdict: apoplectic stroke. His heart couldn't withstand the strain. The police seize all his papers and drawings, and the case is closed. End of story. However, a week later, the newspaper St. Petersburgские Ведомости published a letter written by Fillipov, which he sent to the editorial office literally on the eve of his death. In it, Fillipov wrote that since his youth he had been thinking about how to stop wars and make them almost impossible. Surprising as it may seem, the scientist reported, I have recently made a discovery whose practical application will effectively abolish war. I invented a method for the electrical transmission of shock waves over long distances, and it appears that the shock wave is transmitted in its entirety along the carrier electromagnetic wave. Thus, a dynamite charge detonated in Moscow could transmit its impact to Constantinople. However, with warfare at such distances, war becomes madness and must be abolished. I will publish the details in the fall in the Academy of Sciences proceedings. However, he was not able to publish anything. What exactly did the scientist invent back in 1903? Some researchers suggest that Fillipov's idea was based on a powerful light beam. In other words, the idea of a laser weapon originated in his mind, and he was conducting experiments in this area. Others argue that, of course, the professor did not know about lasers, but he studied ultra-short waves which he obtained using a spark generator. The most daring theory, however, is not about what he invented, but about who killed him. According to this theory, the Tsarist secret police had him killed. The personal order was given by Emperor Nicholas II, the initiator of the Hague Convention on the Laws and Customs of War. He did it not to destroy a dangerous revolutionary, Fillipov was a Marxist, but to save the planet from a weapon too terrible for war. Fillipov's confiscated documents and devices are still considered lost. But is it really the case? Djuna. This story is kind of personal to me. Back in the day, I actually worked at the same research institute where the Soviet Academy of Sciences was studying the phenomenon of the USSR's main healer. I'm talking about Djuna. She first displayed her healing abilities in Tbilisi, where she lived with her first husband after college. There she was known as a healer among influential people, including artists, painters, and poets. Rumors of her miraculous abilities reached Moscow. In 1980, she was brought to Moscow for an almost hopeless case, to save the wife of the head of the USSR State Planning Committee, whom doctors had given up on. Djuna arrived, conducted her sessions, and the woman began to recover. Newspapers throughout the Soviet Union wrote about Djuna, a healer who could cure seriously ill patients with a single movement of her hands. Rumor had it that she had even helped Leonid Brezhnev, the general secretary. The country's leadership tasked the Academy of Sciences with studying Djuna's abilities. Djuna was hired as a senior researcher at the Kotelnikov Institute of Radio Engineering and Electronics of the Russian Academy of Sciences. The institute created a laboratory called Physical Fields of Biological Objects to study the Djuna effect. However, the results of the research were never made public, and the exact method by which Djuna treated people remains a mystery to the general public to this day. It is known only that during treatment sessions the healer's hands became very hot. It was believed that she transferred energy and heat to diseased organs, this way facilitating recovery. Or maybe she was just a good masseuse. Djuna herself was not known for her modesty. In her interviews she claimed that she did more than just heal people. She said that she was capable of reducing the radiation background after Chernobyl and altering the structure of heavy water for nuclear physicists. She even treated her colleagues. She helped Vanga overcome hypertension and Alan Chumak overcome alcoholism. It is said that the healer clearly foresaw her own death in 2015. Even after successful carotid artery surgery, she knew her days were numbered and told everyone so. She died 5 days after the surgery. Grebenikov's anti-gravitation. Meet Viktor Grebennikov. Officially, he was a respected entomologist from Novosibirsk, a specialist in bees. Unofficially, he was a self-taught man without a higher education, who had always looked at the world a little differently. It was precisely this unconventional perspective that may have enabled him to make a discovery that official science considers impossible. It all began in the summer of 1988, when Grebennikov was examining the chitinous coverings of a maybug under a microscope. He was struck by the pattern on the inside of the wing. It was an orderly stamp-like composition reminiscent of a honeycomb. He tried to figure out why nature would come up with such an exquisite structure if it wasn't an accident. The researcher, without any particular purpose, placed one such plate with unusual cells on top of another. Then something strange happened. The small parts slipped out of the tweezers and hung in the air for a few seconds before falling smoothly onto the table. Grebennikov realized he had stumbled upon something incredible. An anti-gravity effect created by a natural structure. He called this phenomenon the cavity structure effect and spent the next 2 years creating a device capable of lifting a person into the air. It wasn't some kind of futuristic shape. Grebennikov, who was also an artist, assembled the flying platform from scrap materials. His own easel formed the basis. Grebennikov made his first flight on the night of March 17th-18th, 1990 near Novosibirsk. He described this flight in an article for the 1993 magazine Youth Technology. However, the scientist's attitude towards his invention soon changed dramatically. The unknown field created by the device had a devastating effect on Grebennikov himself. His health began to deteriorate rapidly. Grebennikov realized that his brainchild was killing him. Did he encounter something even more frightening during his flights? What other properties did he discover about this effect? We don't know. From the late 1990s, he flatly refused to talk about his platform with anyone. In 2001, Viktor Grebennikov died, taking the blueprints and the main secret of his gravitalet with him to the grave. Lermontov predicted the revolution. Predictions by great writers and poets are a topic for a separate video, but we will discuss the most notable one. Mikhail Yurievich Lermontov is one of the most famous Russian poets whose works remain relevant even today. But what if he was something greater? A prophet who saw Russia's future 100 years ahead. Some people believe that Lermontov's name is associated with the mystical code that influences the fate of Russia. In his 1830 poem Prediction, the poet accurately describes the overthrow of the Tsarist regime and the bloody events of the 1917 revolution, which ended in a fratricidal civil war marked by repression, murders and famines. How could a 16-year-old poet have known about these upcoming events? But the poem itself is only the beginning. It is as if some sort of fatal pattern accompanies all the anniversary dates associated with the poet. Judge for yourself. Lermontov's 100th birthday coincided with the start of World War I in July 1914. In 1946, when Lermontov's 150th birthday was celebrated, a political coup took place in the USSR and Nikita Khrushchev was removed from power. What about the poet's 200th anniversary? The revolution in Ukraine, Crimea, and the beginning of events that continue to shape our lives today. What will happen next? Crash in Luzhniki. Some tragedies strike us with their randomness. Others frighten us with their mystical coincidences. 1971 – Scotland Ibrox Stadium. 1982 – USSR Luzhniki Stadium. In both cases, there was a stampede at the exit in the final minutes of a football match. In both cases, an unexpected goal was scored in the final seconds. In both cases, the official death toll was exactly 66 people. As usual, the Soviet authorities chose to conceal information about what happened, so the whole truth about the incident remains unknown to this day. Many believe that the actual number of victims was around 300. Now, let's go back to that cold evening. Moscow, October 20th, 1922. The match between Spartak and Harlem. Thousands of frozen fans begin to leave the stadium early. Suddenly, in the final seconds, Spartak scores another goal. Those who were leaving turned around and tried to return, colliding with the main flow of people. On the icy stairs, a girl slips and falls. Several people try to help her, but they cannot stay on their feet under the pressure of the crowd and fall, forming a huge pile. People scream, but those in the back rows continue to push forward. At some point, the metal railings give way under the tremendous pressure and break. People fall from a height onto the concrete. But why did so many people die? Eyewitnesses claim that the police opened only one narrow exit for thousands of people. But that's not all. The gate to this exit was not even fully open, creating a deadly bottleneck. Why? Because of resentment. Allegedly, during the match, fans threw snowballs at the police, and they decided to teach the crowd a lesson in this way. Moreover, when the crash happened, according to witnesses, the police did not let people back in to help those who had fallen. They just stood there and drove away those who could have saved someone. And that's when the number 66 takes on a new meaning. Perhaps it was not chosen by chance. It allowed everything to be written off as a tragic accident, as in Scotland, and to hide the true scale and main cause of the tragedy, not ice, but human cruelty and negligence. Krokhalev's experiment. A hallucination is an image, sound, or other sensation that arises in a sick person's mind without any external stimulus. But what if I told you that hallucinations can be photographed? What if the images seen by a sick person are actually real? This seemingly crazy idea was conceived in the 1970s by Perm psychiatrist Gennady Krohalev. His hypothesis was simple yet frightening. The brain not only sees hallucinations, but also projects them outward through the eyes like a small movie projector. If so, then these rays could be captured on film. To test his theory, Krohalev built an eerie-looking device. Imagine a regular diving mask with a movie camera lens in place of the glass. The mask was placed over the face of a mentally ill person, and photographs were taken in complete darkness. In more than 100 cases, there was something on the film. The images were blurry and vague, but occasionally faces, snakes and strange creatures could be made out. Everything that the patients described. Krohalev wrote 10 books, which are now stored at the Russian Academy of Sciences, as well as at least 100 scientific articles. The world media wrote about him as a living psychiatric legend, and he was waiting for his Nobel Prize. However, in April 1998, Gennady Krohalev was found dead. The official cause of death was suicide. The strangest thing is that all his archives, books and most importantly photographs disappeared without a trace. Did he see something in his photographs that he shouldn't have? Or was he eliminated? After all, a man who can photograph thoughts is one step away from creating psychotronic weapons. Someone decided that the world was not ready for that. Поле Чудес Division 08. Поле Чудес, Field of Miracles, is a popular TV program that has been broadcast on Russian television for over 30 years. It's a loose adaptation of the US Wheel of Fortune. In 1993, Russian programmer Vadim Bashurov developed a computer game of the same name, which became very popular among Russian gamers. The essence of the game was that participants, characters from Soyuz Multfilm, take turns spinning the wheel and naming a letter or word. You are not asked specific questions, only the theme to which the guessed word relates in some way is announced. But what if I told you that this innocent children's game concealed a real state secret? You guessed words on ordinary topics – animals, cities, food. But sometimes, among all of these, there were two strange incomprehensible categories – employees of Department 08 and heads of Department 08. The players wondered what kind of department this was and who these people were. They put forward all sorts of theories, but the reality turned out to be even more surprising. Department 08 was the code name for Department 03 of the Russian nuclear center in the closed city of Sarov, or Arzamas-16. The names in the game were the real names of actual nuclear scientists. How could this have happened? Very simple. Vadim Bashurov worked at this center. He was told that this particular department was about to be declassified. Seeing nothing wrong with this, Vadim decided to use the almost public data to fill in the categories in the game. Then the declassification was cancelled. Bashurov was summoned by the authorities, who pressured him to delete all the secret data, but the game had already spread. All department employees had to change their legal last names. The department itself was renamed and reorganized. What an unusual story for a trivial old computer game. Sieidi. Imagine walking through the misty forests of Karelia. Suddenly you see a giant multi-ton boulder balancing on 3 tiny pebbles. This is a Sieid. Seids are often found on mountain slopes, and it's unclear how nature or humans could have placed such large stones on such unstable supports in such a place. Seids are surrounded by many legends and myths. For the indigenous Sami people of the north, these were not just stones but sacred objects. The word Seid itself comes from the Sami language and means sacred. The Sami believed that spirits lived in the Seids. They brought them sacrifices of fish oil and animal blood and asked for good luck in hunting. However, conspiracy theories are not always satisfied with this explanation. They claim that Seids appeared in Karelia long before the Sami settled there. Thus, some proclaim Seids to be traces of the Proto-Sami civilization, which disappeared about 3000 years ago after coming to Lapland from the north. Where from? Hyperborea, of course. In this view, the Seids are not just sacred stones, they are remnants of ancient technology. Perhaps they were navigational beacons for travelers through the northern lands. They may have even been elements of a massive astronomical observatory, the purpose of which we will never know. Psychotronic weapons. Are you sure your thoughts are your own? That your fears, decisions and emotions belong to you? Or could it be that you are being influenced by psychotronic weapons? According to psychotronics enthusiasts, these weapons can penetrate your brain and influence the human psyche to modify consciousness, behavior and health. They take some of the information stored in the person's brain, send it to a computer, process it to the required level and feed the modified information back into the brain. All that's needed is to select the appropriate wavelength in the electromagnetic or sound spectrum. These weapons can implant desired emotions in you, such as fear, panic, and despair. Fortunately, protecting yourself is easy. All you need is a Faraday cage that blocks electromagnetic radiation from entering the brain. Do you know what the simplest Faraday cage is? It's a tinfoil hat, of course. But does this weapon really exist? Psychotronics originated in Czechoslovakia in the late 1960s. It was there that inventor Robert Pavlita demonstrated his strange devices, psychotronic generators. His death generator was particularly frightening. It was a prism with a sharp cone on one side and a sphere on the other. During the experiment, Pavlita repeatedly moved the generator closer to and then away from the fly's body. After about 10 minutes of these manipulations, the fly died. Naturally, the KGB became interested in such developments. 2 Soviet scientists were sent to Prague, where they not only confirmed all of Pavlita's experiments, but also found rational explanations for them. They even repeated the experiments in laboratory. This brings us to the most disturbing part. In 2012, the official journal of the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs Research Institute published an article. The author is a doctor of law and a leading researcher. And she writes in black and white that psychotronic terror is a reality. This term refers to a set of illegal activities carried out by an organized group using torsion, electromagnetic and sound technology to quickly or slowly destroy one or more individuals through complete or partial destruction of his personality. The author points out that this weapon has been used since the 1990s for contract killings, torture and apartment racketeering. She emphasizes the need for an urgent international treaty banning it. This information comes from the official journal of the Russian Ministry of Internal Affairs, not a conspiracy theories blog. So maybe psychotronic weapons are not just a fiction after all. Volkov and Zhdanov are FSB agents. First, a disclaimer. All the individuals and organizations discussed here, Navalny, FBK, Volkov and Zhdanov, are recognized by the Russian Federation as foreign agents, terrorists and extremists. When Mr. Navalny was alive and his supporters were considered a serious political force, many people asked themselves the same paradoxical question. How did Alexei Navalny, whom even his opponents acknowledge as a talented politician, manage to surround himself with people whose actions often appear to be outright sabotage? Scandals, unfortunate statements and strange decisions all seemed to play into the hands of his opponents. But what if these were not mistakes or incompetence? What if they were deliberate? Some people theorized that there were moles recruited by the authorities at the heart of his team. Specifically, his closest associates, Leonid Volkov and Ivan Zhdanov, were mentioned. Now, fast forward to today. Navalny is dead, and his entire political machine has been inherited by Volkov and Zhdanov. The result? The movement is fading. Its popularity is plummeting even among its core audience of Russian emigres. So, are Volkov and Zhdanov just spectacularly incompetent leaders? Or are they spectacularly successful agents completing their mission flawlessly? Turgenev and Bigfoot. The public would never have known about this harrowing story if not for Guy de Maupassant. Here is an excerpt from his short story Fear, published in Le Figaro on July 25, 1884. And suddenly I remembered a story Turgenev told us one Sunday at Gustave Flaubert's house. When he was young, he went hunting in a Russian forest. He wandered around all day and in the evening came to the bank of a quiet river. Overcome by an irresistible desire to plunge into the clear water, the hunter undressed and threw himself in. He surrendered himself calmly to the current, which carried him away quietly. Suddenly he felt a hand touch his shoulder. He quickly turned around and saw a terrifying creature staring at him with greedy curiosity. It looked like a woman or a monkey. It had a wide, wrinkled, grimacing, laughing face. 2 indescribable bags, obviously breasts, dangled in front, and long, tangled, sun-reddened head framed her face and floated behind the back. Turgenev felt a wild, chilling fear of the supernatural. He swam with all his might towards the shore, but the monster swam faster and with a joyful squeal touched his neck, back and legs repeatedly. Finally, the young man, mad with fear, reached the shore and ran through the forest as fast as he could, leaving his clothes and gun behind. The terrifying creature followed him, running just as fast and still squealing. Turgenev was about to collapse when a boy herding goats and armed with a whip came running up. He began lashing the repulsive humanoid beast with his whip, and it ran away screaming in pain. Soon, the creature, which resembled a female gorilla, disappeared into the thickets. Thus, the great Russian writer almost fell victim to a lustful female yeti. However, some literary critics believe that Maupassant actually ended his story and Turgenev's with different lines. It turned out that she was a mad woman who had been living in the forest for over 30 years. She was fed by shepherds. She spent half her life swimming in the river. Taras Shugayev. Early on January 9, 2002, a young man called the Moscow's emergency services and said that he was inside a garbage truck. The unfortunate man begged for help. "Help me! The press is going to crush me! Stop, driver!" From the victim's fragmented account, the rescuers determined that Taras Shugayev, a student, had fallen into the garbage truck with the waste. They could hear the man banging on the truck's wall and begging the driver to stop over the phone. The caller managed to give his phone number before the connection was suddenly lost. It took investigators a day to realize that the call was not a prank when they found the mother of the man who had fallen into the garbage truck by using the phone number. The distraught woman reported that her son had not been home for 2 days. They also learned that the missing man's father was an inspector at the Russian audit chamber. The high-ranking official listened to the call recording and recognized his son's voice. Investigators reconstructed the last hours of Taras's life. He was leaving a billiards club with his friends. Then they were walking to the subway. There, just 10 meters from the entrance, is the only trash can in the neighborhood. Then, everything remains a mystery. There are 2 possible explanations. Either the drunk group played a prank on the drunken Shugayev and put him in a trash can, or a fight broke out and Taras still ended up in a trash can. The workers did not see the man in the bin, but simply hooked it up and loaded it onto the garbage truck. Taras was also unlucky with timing. The garbage truck arrived at the bin just a few minutes after his friend's joke. In any case, Taras was unable to escape the truck. His body was never found. It simply disappeared among tons of Moscow garbage. Thanks for watching. What can I say? 3 more levels to go. I guess I will finish this series after all. But please leave a like. YouTube doesn't like this kind of videos, so we need all the help from the algorithm we can get. And as always, a huge shout out to my biggest supporters: Hilzeta Zakharova, Kirill Klimuk, Zimon Berze, Jimmy Albin, Petr Ilich, Marina Holiday, and one more member who wished to remain anonymous. See you guys next time.